In the summer of 1940, after sweeping aside France and the Low Countries in just a few weeks, Nazi Germany confidently launched a sustained air campaign to force Britain to submit. The Luftwaffe believed this would be a quick, clean victory, but reality turned out very different. Even though Germany now controlled most of continental Europe, Britain stubbornly refused to surrender, forcing Berlin to find a way to destroy the Royal Air Force RAF's control of the skies and prepare for the planned invasion codenamed Operation Sea Lion. However, the Luftwaffe entered the campaign already badly worn down. It had lost 30% of its level, and dive bombers along with 20% of its Bf-109 fighters in earlier operations. By contrast, the RAF was shielded by the advanced Dowding air defense system, a highly effective network of radar observation posts, and centralized command, one of the most modern of its time. The Royal Navy was still the strongest navy in the world, making any German landing plan a dangerous gamble. Britain also had the backing of the British Empire, the United States, and various governments in exile. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe's high command was in turmoil. Hermann Göring, its overall commander, was seen as arrogant and out of touch. Generals Hugo Sperle and Albert Kesselring were bitterly divided over tactics, one cautious, the other reckless. On the other side, the RAF under Sir Hugh Dowding, together with Keith Park and Trafford Leigh-Mallory, despite their disagreements, still managed to coordinate effectively to defend Britain's skies. To understand why the Battle of Britain became a turning point, we have to step back and look at the whole European chessboard. If the opening section shows us a Britain standing alone, this part reveals that even the seemingly unstoppable attacker Germany was already carrying cracks it did not want to acknowledge. After a chain of lightning victories, Nazi Germany controlled almost the entire continent. But the price was steep. The Luftwaffe had lost up to 30% of its bombers in France and Norway, along with 20% of its elite Bf-109 fighters. Based on faulty intelligence, Berlin convinced itself that the RAF was on its last legs, an illusion that pushed them into the battle with a dangerously inflated confidence. Meanwhile, the British prepared for a fight to the death. With an advantage, Germany did not expect the Dowding system, which fused radar human observation and unified command into a single modern network ahead of its time. The Royal Navy remained a steel shield against any invasion attempt, while support from the Commonwealth, the United States, and governments in exile gave London added strength. Ironically, it was the Luftwaffe itself that was shackled by a leadership crisis. Göring was overconfident, Sperle cautious, Kesselring aggressive. Three competing mindsets that pulled German strategy back and forth. In contrast, the RAF's trio of Dowding, Park, and Leigh-Mallory, though far from free of disputes, still maintained enough cohesion to hold the line over Britain. The question hanging over all of this is simple. Who would be able to exploit their advantages at the right moment, and who would pay the price for their strategic illusions? The opening phase of the Battle of Britain began over the waters of the Channel itself, where Germany believed it could break British will before landing the decisive blow in the air. From 2nd July 1940 and for 5 straight weeks, the Luftwaffe focused on attacking shipping escorts and reconnaissance targets, flying an average of more than 1,300 sorties a day. Those numbers show just how brutal the tempo of combat was. Every mission was a roll of the dice, and losses on both sides mounted by the hour. German intentions were clear to apply economic and military pressure to make Britain flinch, while probing how strong the RAF really was. But things did not unfold as expected. The British did not yield, and the Luftwaffe burned through its strength faster than anticipated. This was the first clear signal that this campaign would not end quickly as Berlin had imagined. And it was precisely at this turning point, when the wakes of bombed ships had barely faded, that German officers were forced into a bolder decision to shift the full weight of the offensive into the skies. That pivot opened the next phase, Adlerangriff, the Eagle attack, the operation that was supposed to decide whether the Luftwaffe could crush the RAF once and for all. During the Adlerangriff phase of the Eagle attack, the Luftwaffe was convinced that it needed only one decisive punch to bring Britain down. But things went off track right from Eagle Day on 13th of August 1940, when chaos in radio communications led many bomber formations to take off without their fighter escorts. A string of aircraft were shot down, and the strikes against radar stations and airfields still failed to break the Dowding system, the sophisticated air defense brain the British had spent years building. 2 days later, Germany ran into Black Thursday, a truly dark day, as losses continued to rise with nothing like the expected results. Then came 18 August, the hardest day, with more than 2,000 sorties flown, and some of the most intense dogfights of the entire campaign raging over southern England. Germany believed that the RAF was finally exhausted, but this was a grave miscalculation. The British still had enough strength to commit their reserves at the critical moment. At this point, one thing became obvious: the Luftwaffe was losing momentum, while the RAF, on the contrary, was fighting more effectively with each passing day. And this shifting balance would lead straight to the next turning point, when the battlefield would no longer be just the sky, but the very heart of Britain itself, London. When the Luftwaffe shifted fully to bombing British cities, It believed it had seized the initiative. In reality, it was walking into a far more dangerous crossroads. Moving into this next phase, the weaknesses Berlin had tried to conceal began to show at the strategic level, in the tools of war, and in the minds of the men flying the missions. First came the intelligence failures. Göring's aide Schmidt repeatedly reported that the RAF was almost finished, while Kesselring believed the British had only a few hundred aircraft left. The truth was very different. There were still 600, 700 Spitfires and Hurricanes ready to hit back. These illusions drove Germany into misguided decisions and deeper into the quagmire. On top of that, technical limitations became a burden that could no longer be ignored. The Ju-87 Stuka was too slow and turned into an easy target. The Bf-110, originally expected to be an effective escort fighter, proved clumsy and outmatched by the Spitfire. Can a campaign at the strategic level really be won when its core tools are simply not suited to the job? And finally, there was the human factor, something every war plan must pay for if it ignores. German pilots had to cross the channel day after day, always carrying the fear of ending up in the cold sea. The constant stress drove them to rely more and more on alcohol and cigarettes. Morale eroded, and many became so exhausted they no longer had the calm needed to fight. The skies over Britain were not just wearing down machines, they were grinding down the Luftwaffe's will to fight. After weeks of tension and repeated intelligence failures, the Luftwaffe entered a phase where all its weaknesses began to stand out in stark relief. And at exactly this moment, an incident that seemed small on the surface, but would pivot the entire campaign took place. On 24 August, a German bomber formation accidentally dropped its bombs on London. The British responded immediately with a retaliatory raid on Berlin, striking at the already fragile pride of Hermann Göring. Instead of stubbornly continuing to hit RAF airfields, he shifted the entire strategy toward bombing cities. That was the turning point, an emotional decision that altered the course of the air war. Once the Luftwaffe took its pressure off key airfields, the RAF got the breathing space it desperately needed, runways were repaired, reserve pilots were brought to the front line, and squadrons were redeployed. Meanwhile, Bf-109s had only about 10 minutes of combat time over southern England. Due to fuel limits and inherent disadvantage that Germany's new strategy only made worse. Then the Blitz began. Night after night, London, Coventry, and Liverpool were drenched in bombs. But British morale did not collapse the way Berlin had hoped. Bombs could demolish houses, but they could not bring down the will to resist. At the same time the Luftwaffe was being drained dry, Britain produced over 1,000 more aircraft than Germany in 1940 alone, while the Germans lacked roughly a third of the pilots and ground crew they needed. This was no longer simply a contest in the air, it had become a race of endurance, and the Luftwaffe was falling behind by the hour. When the Luftwaffe shifted to bombing British cities during the Blitz, it believed the RAF was spent, and Britain's defenses were wavering. But that very shift opened the door for the RAF to recover and set up the turning point that would drive the campaign toward its end. That is why this climax becomes the deciding moment. Germany thought it was forcing Britain into a corner, when in reality, it was walking straight into its greatest mistake. On 15th of September 1940, the Luftwaffe launched its most powerful assault on London, hoping to deliver a crushing blow and force Britain to bow. Instead, the RAF, throwing in all of 11 Group and its reserve forces, rose to meet them with a ferocious response, shooting down wave after wave of German aircraft in full view of the people of London. Berlin was stunned if the RAF was still this strong. Then what did all those earlier reports Britain is about to collapse really mean? Worse still, German pilot morale went into free fall. Parties to drown out exhaustion, long nights of mourning in the barracks, and nearly 80 suicides or suicide attempts in just 2 months showed how deeply the Luftwaffe was unraveling from within. By the end of October, Germany was forced to halt daytime attacks. Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion, accepting that the plan to invade Britain had evaporated, and rushed to shift his forces toward preparations for Operation Barbarossa. The Battle of Britain was over, and for the first time, Nazi Germany had been stopped on its path to conquering Europe. At the end of this story, we arrive at the most important question of all. Why did the Luftwaffe, a force that had spread terror across Europe, fail right at Britain's doorstep? The answer does not lie in a single cause, but in a chain of strategic blunders, miscalculations, and psychological pressures Berlin never truly acknowledged. First and foremost, the Luftwaffe never had a unified strategy. From attacking shipping to bombing airfields, to shifting onto citywide terror raids, their targets kept changing. Even the German pilots themselves were left unsure what the real priority was. And in war, a lack of consistency is just another way of weakening yourself. Next came the intelligence failures. From Schmidt to Kesselring, many of the reports sent back to Berlin claimed the RAF was nearly finished. But the reality was the direct opposite. The Dowding system was still functioning, the radar chain was still intact, and the RAF still had hundreds of aircraft ready to scramble. This was a direct blow to the Luftwaffe's confidence. They believed they had already won, when in fact the fight had only just begun. Another factor rarely emphasized but critically important was the psychological strain of flying over the Channel. German pilots faced the constant fear of ditching into cold water with little chance of returning to their units, unlike their British counterparts. That fear built up mission after mission, sleepless nights, weight loss, growing apathy, and finally, a collapse of morale. Meanwhile, every RAF pilot shot down over Britain had a decent chance of returning to the fight. So who really held the advantage in this kind of war? Then there were the issues of manpower and materiel. Germany lacked both pilots and aircraft, while Britain outproduced it by more than 1,000 aircraft in 1940 alone. On top of that stood the Dowding radar network, a technological edge that changed the rules of the game. And Göring's greatest mistake, like a knife turned on his own campaign, was shifting to city bombing just when RAF airfields were at their weakest. That was the golden opportunity Britain seized to rebuild its strength. In the end, when we pull back and look at the whole picture, it becomes clear the Battle of Britain did not just save Britain, it saved the future of Europe. This was the first time Hitler was stopped. And on those summer skies of 1940, the Luftwaffe paid for every one of its errors.